My mom rehearsed her speech for my sister's wedding for months. At mine, she stood up, took the microphone, looked out at 60 people, and said, "I have nothing prepared." Then she laughed a little, shrugged, and said, "What can I say? Some things you just can't rehearse," and raised her glass and sat back down. 11 seconds. I know it was 11 seconds because it's on video, and I have watched it more times than I should admit. And every time I watch it, I hear the same thing underneath the laughter in the room. My mother telling everyone I love, in the politest possible way, exactly how much of her I was worth. My name is Isla. I'm 33 now. I was 31 that day. And for you to understand those 11 seconds, I have to take you back 6 years, to my sister's wedding, and the speech that became a family legend. My sister Margot is 3 years older than me, and I want to be clear from the start. Margot is not the villain of this story. That matters because in most of these stories, the golden child and the mother come as a matched set. And for most of my life, I assumed they did in ours too. Margot was the firstborn, the pageant kid, the one whose baby book is filled to the back cover. Mine stops at 8 months, mid-sentence, like a canceled show. When our parents divorced, I was 11, Margot was 14. The house split the way houses do. Margot orbited mom, and I drifted toward dad, quiet, easy dad, who showed up to every one of my cross-country meets and stood at the finish line in his work boots. I didn't choose him over her. I chose oxygen. But my mother, Vivian, has never in her life encountered a fact she couldn't renovate. And in her renovation, I chose that man. And everything she did to me afterward was just the invoice arriving. And what she did, mostly, was subtraction. She wasn't cruel at volume. She was cruel by omission, which is worse, because you can't screenshot an absence. She came to Margot's dance recitals with flowers and to my meets never. Running isn't really a spectator thing, sweetheart. Margot's high school graduation got a party with a rented tent. Mine got a card, signed Best Mom, Best, like a colleague. When I called to tell her I'd gotten into my first choice college, she let me finish and then said, "That's nice. Did I tell you what Margot's boyfriend did this weekend? I could give you 100 of these. I'll give you one more, because it's the load-bearing one." At my college graduation dinner, my mother stood up, unprompted, and gave a toast about Margot's promotion, which had been announced that morning. At my graduation dinner, my dad, God bless him, stood up right after and toasted me for so long the waiter had to circle back twice. So, Margot's wedding, 6 years before mine. Country club, 230 guests, string quartet. And my mother's mother of the bride speech was, I have to be honest, magnificent. 11 minutes. She workshopped it for 4 months. This is not an exaggeration. She enrolled in a public speaking course at the community center to do Margot justice. She practiced in the living room with a wooden spoon for a microphone. There was a slideshow, synchronized, that she'd scanned from photo albums herself. There were callbacks. There was a bit about Margot's first word that made 230 people laugh, and then, 90 seconds later, a callback to it that made them cry. People talked about that speech for years. Strangers at other family events would say, "Oh, you're Vivian's daughter. Her speech at your wedding was," and I'd say, "My sister's wedding," and watch them do the math on my face. When Jonah proposed to me, the second phone call I made was to my mother. The first was Dad. I've stopped apologizing for the order. She said congratulations the way you'd congratulate a coworker's niece. And then she asked what Margot thought of the ring. We planned a small wedding, on purpose, and we paid for it ourselves. 60 people in my dad's backyard, string lights, my college roommate officiating, dinner at long tables under the maple Dad and I planted when I was 12. I know now that the smallness itself was a charge on my mother's invoice. A backyard wedding meant there was nothing for her to run, no country club to be seen at, no committee. She called it your little gathering for the entire engagement. As in, will there even be assigned seats at your little gathering? For Margot's wedding, my mother attended 4 dress fittings. 4. There are photos of her at the boutique holding a champagne flute and a little paddle that said, "Say yes." For mine, I invited her to the one fitting that mattered. Final alterations, the reveal, the moment. 6 weeks out, on a Saturday, chosen around her calendar. She confirmed twice. Then that morning she texted 40 minutes before, "Not going to make it, Margot needs help picking paint for the guest bath. You understand? Send pics. Paint. For a guest bathroom." That was the actual sentence. My dad's girlfriend at the time, lovely woman, didn't last, he's a slow healer, offered to come instead, and I said no thank you. and I stood on the little pedestal in my dress alone. And the seamstress, a 60-something woman named Dot with pins in her mouth, looked at my face in the three-way mirror and said, around the pins, "Whoever didn't show up, honey, we're not crying about her in the dress. Off the dress. Those are the rules." I laughed instead, which was her whole plan. Dot got an invitation. Dot came to the wedding. Dot, a stranger in April, showed up in October with a card and a gift and waterproof mascara. Prepared. Hold that word. It's the whole story. But here's the part I need on the record, because it's the difference between an oversight and an operation. 8 months before the wedding, at Easter in front of witnesses, I asked her directly. I'd learned to do that. Direct asks, witnesses, terms my family's historians couldn't later revise. I said, "Mom, I'd love for you to give a toast at the reception, like you did for Margot. Will you?" And my mother put her hand on her chest and said, "Isla, of course. I'm your mother." 8 months. She had 8 months. The wedding day was, and I say this with a full heart, almost entirely wonderful. October light. My dad crying in work boots he'd polished. Jonah forgot every word of his vows and just said, "You, it's you. It was always going to be you." And that was somehow better than whatever he'd written. Margot was my matron of honor and handled the day like a Secret Service detail. I saw her intercept our mother twice at the ceremony and steer her, smiling, away from whatever was brewing. Then dinner, then toasts. Dad went first and told the story of the maple tree over our heads, how I'd insisted we plant it even though the internet said it wouldn't do well in our soil, and how he'd watched me water a stubborn stick for 2 summers until it decided to live. "That's her," he said. "That's just her whole thing, folks. She waters stubborn sticks. Jonah, you were a bit of a stubborn stick when she found you." The place roared. Jonah's mother, Rosemary, stood up next, unscheduled, holding her napkin, just to say that in 4 years I had never once let her leave a visit without a container of leftovers. And I know what that is. That's a girl who was raised by somebody to take care of people. I just want to say I see it. I remember finding Dad's face when she said raised by somebody. I remember what he did with his eyebrows. And then the DJ said, "And now, the mother of the bride." I want to describe what I felt in the 4 seconds she took to stand up, because it's the most embarrassing thing in this whole story. Hope, 31 years old, married for 2 hours, and my stomach still did the thing it did at every cross-country finish line, scanning the crowd. Because she'd had 8 months. Because she'd said, "Of course, I'm your mother." Because some ancient dumb machinery in me still believed that a wedding of all things would be the day the pattern broke. She took the microphone. She looked out at everyone, and she said, "I have nothing prepared." Beat. The little laugh. What can I say? And some things you just can't rehearse. Glass up. To the couple. And she sat down. 11 seconds. Here is what 11 seconds of nothing does to a room where half the guests were at the 11-minute speech. It goes off like a flashbang with the sound removed. I watched it move through the tables. The people who knew, finding each other's eyes. My aunt's mouth actually falling open. Rosemary putting her hand flat on the table like she was bracing it. And my mother sat back down and speared a piece of chicken, satisfied because Vivian's native language is subtext, and she had just delivered to a captive audience the keynote address of my entire childhood. This one isn't worth preparing for. I didn't cry. I want that on the record, too. I did the smile, the raised glass smile, the one I've been doing since I was 11. But under the table, Jonah had my hand, and he was squeezing it in a pattern, our old code from bad dinners. "I'm here, I'm here, I'm here." And then a chair scraped, and Margot stood up, and my sister, who was not on the toast list, who was terrified of public speaking, who once bribed a groomsman to give her own maid of honor speech at a friend's wedding, took the microphone out of the DJ's hand. "Hi, matron of honor. Sorry, we're doing one more." She was shaking, holding cards, actual index cards. Mom says she has nothing prepared. That's okay. I've been preparing this since June, just in case. Just in case. My sister had watched our mother say, "Of course, I'm your mother" at Easter, and had gone home and started writing a backup speech because she knew. She'd known our whole lives. That was the part that undid me. Not the speech itself, though the speech was beautiful. It was the just in case. It was finding out that the favoritism I'd spent 30 years being told I imagined had a second witness the entire time. And the witness was its beneficiary, and she'd been quietly keeping index cards. The speech was 6 minutes. And it was, in its way, a controlled demolition. Margot didn't say one word about our mother. Not one. She just told stories. and every story had a hole in it shaped exactly like Vivian. The time our car broke down after a meet and 14-year-old Isla and Dad ate gas station nachos on the hood and rated them like food critics. Who drove 3 hours when Margot's first marriage— sorry, spoiler, this wedding was her second— when Margot's world fell apart, who showed up with a duffel bag and no questions? This one. This little sister right here slept on my floor for a week like a Labrador. The time I taught Margot's kids to make Dad's pancakes and stood behind them the whole time with my hands hovering, not helping, just ready. My sister has spent her whole life, Margot said at the end, looking at the head table, and everyone knew where she was looking even though she was looking at me, being ready to catch people who never once turned around to check if she'd need catching back. Jonah, turn around sometimes. That's the whole job. Everyone stand up. To Isla. Somebody's been preparing to love her right for 31 years. And buddy, tonight the position finally got filled. 60 people on their feet. My mother stayed seated for 4 seconds. It's on the video. 4 full seconds. Doing the math on whether sitting was survivable. And then rose, last, holding her glass at half-mast like a flag on a bad day. I'd love to tell you the wedding ended in confrontation, but it didn't. Weddings don't. Families like mine don't. It ended in dancing and string lights and my dad dipping rosemary to Sinatra. The confrontation came over the following 6 weeks, in my mother's preferred format, a campaign. Because Vivian understood, by the car ride home probably, that 11 seconds had cost her something she actually values, the audience. So the revisions began. First, she told her sister she'd frozen, that she'd had a beautiful speech in her purse and been ambushed by public speaking anxiety, a condition that had apparently gone into remission for exactly 1 evening 6 years earlier. Then the story improved. She'd chosen not to speak because Isla made it clear it was a casual backyard thing and a big speech would have embarrassed her. Then the third draft, the masterpiece. She'd stayed brief on purpose, graciously, because it was obvious Margot had something planned and I didn't want to steal my daughter's moment. She sent me that version herself, in a text, with the words, "I hope you're not letting people twist what was actually a lovely night. Some of us don't need scripts to show love." I didn't answer, because I'd learned by then that answering Vivian is refueling her. She escalated to a house call. Week 5, a Sunday. She appeared at our door with a bakery box and, I am not making this up, a purse-sized notebook, which she produced in our entryway like a magician revealing the card. "I want to show you something," she said, "because people are being very unfair to me." And she opened the notebook to a page with writing on it and held it up. My speech. The one I had with me at the wedding. I froze, Isla. Do you know what it's like to freeze in front of everyone? I've been so ashamed I couldn't even tell you. For about 2 seconds, standing in my own entryway, I felt the old machinery lurch, the finish line scan, the hope. 2 seconds. Then I looked at the page. I'm a technical editor. It's my job. I notice things about documents. I can't not. And what I noticed was fresh ink, 1 shade, no crossings out, no wear on the page, in a notebook whose spine cracked when she opened it. A notebook being opened for the first time. A speech carried in her purse through a backyard wedding, a buffet dinner, and 4 hours of dancing without a single crease. She'd written it that week. Possibly that morning. It was a prop, manufactured for this doorstep, and she'd brought pastries as set dressing. "Read me the first line," I said. "What? You wrote it months ago and carried it all night. It must be burned in. Close the notebook and give me the first line." My mother looked at me, and I watched her run the odds, and I watched her fold. She closed the notebook. She said, "I don't respond well to interrogation," and picked her purse up off the bench, wounded, dignified, already drafting the version of this doorstep she'd tell her sister. At the door she turned, she always turns, exits are her best work, and said, "You know, Margot never would have treated me like this." "You're right," I said. "You made sure she never had a reason." She left the bakery box. Jonah and I ate the pastries watching television because we're not martyrs, and they were excellent because my mother has never once brought a flawed prop to a performance. But my cousin Tash answered her group chat campaign in a way. Tash is my age, grew up 4 houses down, has receipts going back to the Obama administration. She called me and said, "Isla, I've sat on something for 6 weeks because I didn't want to wreck your newlywed glow, but she's rewriting it in the family chat and I'm not built for it." And she sent me a screenshot. It was from the cousins and aunts group chat. The big one, the one my mother forgets isn't a friendly audience, dated 9 days before my wedding. Someone had asked innocently, "Viv, Are you doing another famous speech? And my mother had replied, and I'm going to quote it exactly because I've earned the right. Ha! No, I'm saving my material. You perform for the weddings that are going somewhere. This one can have what she always gets from me. My presents. That's the gift. You perform for the weddings that are going somewhere. 9 days before. Premeditated. In writing. With an emoji. I sat with that screenshot for 3 days. Jonah's position for the record was scorched earth. My gentle husband, who signs birthday cards to his own mother with 3 exclamation points, wanted me to post it in the family chat with no caption and let the ecosystem handle it. Margot, when I showed her, went quiet in a way I'd never seen and then said, I'll read it at the vow renewal during my toast. Word for word, with the emoji, I'll say smiling face out loud. And I would be lying if I said I didn't storyboard both versions in the shower more than once. But here's what I decided, and it's the reason this story doesn't end in a ballroom with me reading text into a microphone, even though I know that's the version that scratches the itch. There was no audience left to expose her to. Everyone who mattered had already seen the original performance live. 60 people watched her hold up empty hands at my wedding. The screenshot wasn't a weapon. It was just the receipt for what everyone had already watched her buy. Exposing Vivian would have given her the one thing she was starving for since Margot's toast, a scene with herself at the center. So I did the thing she'd been doing to me for 30 years. I subtracted. Not an announcement. Announcements are audiences, too. I just stopped. Stopped calling on Sundays. Stopped the birthday brunch. Stopped absorbing. When she noticed, it took 19 days. And yes, I counted old habits. She called and got my voicemail and left a message that started wounded and ended furious. And the furious part finally said the quiet part. This is about the speech. My God, Isla, you've always been like this. Everything is a competition with your sister that nobody entered but you. I couldn't perform some pageant on demand. I'm not a trained seal. You got my presents. Some daughters would be grateful. My presents. That's the gift. Same phrase as the group chat. My mother is many things, but she's consistent in her drafts. I played the voicemail for Margot at her kitchen table, and my sister listened with her jaw set, and then she picked up her own phone and called our mother on speaker and said the thing that I think actually ended the old world. Mom, it's Margot. I heard the voicemail. I want you to hear this from your favorite so you can't file it under jealousy. I read the group chat. Weddings that are going somewhere. My first marriage went to a divorce lawyer, so which of us were you performing for? You're not speaking at the vow renewal in May. Rick's mom will handle the toast. She had one prepared within a week of us asking. Turns out that's just what it looks like when somebody means it. Silence on the line. Then my mother, in a small, recalculating voice, You girls are being turned against me. No, Margot said. We compared notes. 30 years late. That's all this is. Here's the accounting, because even the emotional stories deserve one. My mother and I have spoken 4 times in the 2 years since. All 4 were initiated by her, and all 4 were auditions. Not apologies, auditions, checking whether the audience had softened. Call 2 was my birthday, and she spent it explaining that Margot's coldness was clearly your doing, which told me the vow renewal ban had held. Rick's mother gave the toast in May 7 minutes, and by all accounts my mother applauded with her hands at chin height, the church clap, the one that photographs as grace and lands as protest. Call 3, she asked with no detectable irony, whether I was planning anything for Dad's 65th where family might speak, and I understood she was scouting venues. The audience hasn't hardened exactly. It's just left the theater, and she keeps checking the box office. 8 months ago, an envelope arrived. Thick, handwritten, a speech. 5 pages, dated, titled, For Isla, What I Should Have Said. And I'm going to be honest with you because this story only works honest. Parts of it were beautiful. The woman can write. That was never the question. There was a story in it about the day I was born that I had never heard, and I sat on my kitchen floor and cried reading it. But page 5 ended with, I hope you'll find an occasion where I might read this aloud so people can hear who I really am. So people can hear. Even the apology needed a venue. I wrote back one line, the only line I've sent her in 2 years. It was never about the speech, Mom. It was about the preparing. She hasn't answered. I think she's still trying to figure out how to perform that sentence, and it can't be done, and that's the point. Last month was our 2nd anniversary, and Jonah and I had people to the backyard. Dad's backyard, under the maple, same long table. No occasion beyond the date. And after dinner, without planning it, they started standing up. Dad, with 2 new minutes about the tree. Rosemary, with the leftovers bit, revised and expanded. Tash, who toasted the group chat, may it never learn discretion. Margot, no index cards this time, hands steady. And Dot the seamstress, who is somehow now just fully a member of this family, who hems Margot's kids' costumes every Halloween. Dot stood up with her glass and said, "I've known this girl 2 years. I was ready with a speech after 2 fittings. Some people had 3 decades and came up empty. Anyway, the dress still fits her life. That's the toast. Little toasts, dumb ones, 4 sentences each, for no audience but us." And I sat there under the string lights and understood the actual moral of my own story, so let me leave you with it. My mother rehearsed for months to celebrate one daughter, and stood up empty-handed for the other, and she thought that told the room something about me. But love doesn't live in the rehearsal. The people who love you have been preparing your whole life. Every meet they showed up to, every floor they let you sleep on, every container of leftovers. And when you hand them a microphone with no warning at all, it turns out they're never unready. She had nothing prepared. Everyone else had 31 years.